How is it December 15th? This is convocation week. Commencement day. Is it? Commencement
Tomorrow?
was Monday was commencement, and we had our convocation Tuesday morning. So, but it's a week of 20 of them or something. I don't know, 30 of them.
Oh my gosh, well,
Crazy.
thank you for being here.
Crazy week.
Okay. We're ready to go.
Okay. So I'm Carol Bastille. I'm the Dean of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at ASU. We probably could do introductions if we want to start. Mark, go ahead.
I'm Mark McCain. I'm the Director of Data Strategy and Compliance at Mary Lou Fulton.
I'm Alicia. I'm the current Executive Director.
Bruce Duplanty, Department of Ed, Deputy Associate Superintendent.
Catherine Haley, member of the State Board.
Jess.
Jessica Mueller, Research and Data Analyst at the State Board.
Jackie.
Jackie Clay, County Superintendent, Cochise County on the State Board.
Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to run this or do you want me to run it?
Yeah, sure. Run if you want. Easier for you.
And I can look at her too.
Yeah, sure.
So, so the question is, what makes an EPP a quality EPP, right? I mean, this is the big question, you know, it's been a question for a really long time in my life. And so I want to start this though by giving you a sense of the way that we have been thinking about this, and then a way that you might be able to think about this, because I think it's difficult right now to think about. We've opened up the doors. We need more people in teaching. We talk about a teacher shortage. And so that always leads to something that we talk about a lot called principled innovation, like we can, but should we? And I think that's, you know, it's hard to know. And then how do you get the information that you need? So I'm going to try to present this in a way that talks about sort of our approach and what we're thinking about right now, just so you have that context. And then we'll talk a little bit about what I think creates and how we think about quality in ed prep. So we've been saying for a long time at ASU that, you know, we're in an unprecedented moment. We've got a workforce problem, but we think about it not as a teacher shortage problem. We think about it as a workforce design problem, because we've been talking about recruitment and retention for many, many years. But the fact is, this is not about recruitment and retention. We have a workforce that is, you know, a single teacher with 25 kids, you know, and it's random. And now we've got teachers who are at all kinds of levels of experience. And frankly, the job is not humanly possible, in my opinion, given everything that we're seeing around changing demographics and disparities of kids and all of that. Plus the fact that one teacher could be an emergency certified teacher who's had absolutely no preparation. So there are 3.5 million classrooms that have to be staffed. And when we think about that, it's a really daunting problem. So we know that really across the globe, when we think about this one teacher, this is what happens. In the state of Arizona, there's 173 competencies. We know that the job is inflexible. They can't just come and go and do what they need to do for their life and all kinds of things. They lack autonomy. It's an isolated job. They're often disrespected and overwhelmed. There are two things we learned in the pandemic. One is people want flexibility and they do not want to be isolated, and teaching is both. So as we have been thinking about this job of the teacher, we said this. We started looking at grade levels of teachers, and we said, look, this is what a grade level of teacher typically looks like, right, in third grade or in high school or in whatever, but could be a math department, it could be anything. But you would have a teacher, right, who's been teaching for 15 years, go through a traditional preparation program at a university. They might be nationally board certified. They may be a teacher of the year. And they may be really, really good at teaching math and reading. And then you could have a fourth year teacher, right, who came through an alt-cert program, former engineer, loves to teach science and tech. She's okay at teaching reading, but just hasn't had a lot of experience with it. A second year teacher that came through a residency program was a YouTube crafter. Still trying to figure out what that is. Really, study the science of reading, a fine math teacher. And somebody else who's an emergency cert, just loves kids, has been a camp counselor, so at teaching reading and math, because this person has not had a lot of experience in that. But, here is a person of color, a male person of color, right? Which is unusual at the elementary level. But this person only gets, right, those 25 kids. And so we asked this question about who do you want, right? Who do you want for your kids? And so when we don't also have enough high quality educators surrounding learners, we also have an equity problem. So we started to think about this question and about how the answer to that question then becomes all of them, that we want all of them because they all have different kinds of experiences. They all are coming from different kinds of backgrounds, and they all, can bring something. They all have strengths that they bring to the table. So we said, look, what if we could think about what we're calling the next education workforce that could provide all students with deeper and personalized learning by building teams of educators with distributed expertise and empower those educators by developing better ways to enter the profession, specialize, and advance. So we can open up the door and we can say we want to have flexible pathways for people to enter the profession, but don't put them in a classroom by themselves. And so we're working really, really hard to try to figure out how do we get our school systems now to start thinking about how these educators work on teams. So we started to unpack this role of an educator who we asked to be everything the collective we knows. And we started to think about how we could start to build these teams with distributed expertise using the people who are there. We know that this can't cost $1 bazillion. We know that we've got to utilize the people who are there, the strengths of the people who are there, and we have to put learners at the center. So we have to be able to say who are the learners, and then who are the people, who are the adults around them that they need. What's the expertise that they need? So we start to build human capital. And we start to think about now that third grade educator team as a team. And so now one of those people, the person who's been there longest, has the most experience. We make that person a lead teacher, not that the longest experience necessarily makes the best lead teacher, but okay, go with me here. You have teacher B and C, and you have teacher D, who is a paid teacher resident. But that all of them have different kinds of responsibilities. And then you have paras who are already there, right, around that team of 100 learners who might be a digital learning facilitator. They might be student success coaches. You might not have all of these people, but you certainly would have different levels of these people and different people who now have different kinds of jobs. So a paraprofessional who's actually trained to be that digital learning facility, trained to be a student success coach, people who today I think are very underprepared, who we could be advancing in some way and thinking about this differently. And then the blue people are people who are community educators who come in potentially as high dosage tutors or who play other reading accelerators. And then there are people who also have advancement opportunity, like the lead teacher who now are cross team, right? They now are working cross teams. So these kinds of configurations then start to change how we think about not only who teachers are, the roles that they play, but how we then prepare them. So we're now thinking about professional educators, for example, right, that can play different kinds of roles. And we can send this all to you. Para-educators who now advance and who can be prepared to do different kinds of roles in classrooms. Community educators, right? We're building a whole platform around community educators so that the people from the community can bring their expertise. And then leaders and thinking about, again, these cross-team leaders, team leads, building system leaders, et cetera. Also thinking about what are the new pathways for entry, advancement, and specialization. So there's a lot that we've been thinking about. We now have 70 school systems across the country. Mesa Public Schools is still our largest partner with now 30 schools that are launching these team-based models. And it is really helping us to really think about not only the benefits of what it means for people to start working in teams, but also then how do we start to prepare people in these markedly different ways and for different levels. If you think about healthcare, for example, where we used to have LPNs and RNs, and today you have a lot of technicians and you have nurse practitioners and physician's assistants and doctors who specialize and nurses who specialize, we don't have that really in education. People are all trained as widget teachers to do the same thing for a group of kids. So this is a fundamental shift in the way that we are thinking about who educators are, and I use educators and not teachers, but how they work together and what their roles are. So this is where we now have launching and learning cohorts with school systems that are moving this direction with us. And then we start to think about, all right, what does this mean? When we think about designing and we think about what educator preparation could and should look like today. So now let me get to, with that context of kind of where we're headed, then I started to think about what's the buyer's guide to teacher preparation. So there's a lot out there. We've got a lot of different players right now who are certifying teachers. You have ASU, NAU, you got the universities, and you've got others who may come into that space. You've got school districts now that can certify their own teachers. And so none of it, okay, some of it is bad. Some of it we really shouldn't be doing. But in some ways, we may need more options. But the options fall on and have pros and cons, I think, based on these 8 elements. So I started to think about this really as a buyer's guide, right? Like if we could think about this, right? Like if you could put them on this sort of, what's the criteria for this? And there really isn't anything out there. So we're kind of making this up as we go in some ways. Bruce, you could chime in anytime. So let me just start with flexibility. So I think a quality educator prep program, now keep in mind, we certify, the universities typically certify for almost everything. The districts are picking and choosing, maybe some of these other alt certs are picking, they're not doing every certification that there is. We don't do every certification. However, the ability for there to be multiple certifications for mobility between certifications is important, because we find that people start in one certification, but they want to move to another one seamlessly. We also think that the ability to be able to do this in multiple modalities is also important. There are people who need face-to-face, there are people who can deal with online non-synchronous programs, and there are people who want remote synchronous because they're in rural areas or where's the reach. We also think about modularity to combine certification. So can the program be modularized to combine one certification endorsement area? Because we think about, if you think about elementary special ed, elementary secondary, what we've tried to do now is to think about how we modularize these so that people can pick up depending on where they end up, right? Where do they think they're going to be? And in what area, part of the state do they live in? Do they need second language learning, right? Do they need that endorsement? Do they need elementary and then, second language endorsement? Do they need, everybody needs special ed right now? So there's also this ability to really think about how the preparation program can serve the context in which that person is going to be working, because just creating a whole bunch of generalists out there is probably not going to serve our population extraordinarily well. And the other thing, right, is this issue around moving from non-degree to degree. So the districts who are doing this now as non-degree programs, others that do this as non-degree programs, is there a way to start thinking about, so we work with PV, we work with Paradise Valley, we work with Mesa right now with their programs, so that those students going through that program have options around non-degree and degree. But if in the future they wanted to move it to a degree program, we can do that. And we will allow that reverse transcripting to happen. So there's all kinds of things within this area of flexibility that we also need. Otherwise, we have people who come out of programs and they're stuck, right? In a particular area, in a particular, they've gotten what everybody else has gotten. Then there's this issue of specialization. As we think about teams, we've changed our teacher preparation program now so that every student coming out actually has a specialty, a specialization, a specialty or specialization. There are paraprofessionals who are now coming in the program that I think need specialties. And we should be thinking about what those are, right? They should be literacy accelerators. They should be, we've got them in special ed positions. They should not be in special ed. They've never been trained in those positions, but they're really, really underprepared. But they tend to be the people, right, who've been assigned to a kid with special needs in some way, shape, or form. And that's problematic. On the other side of that are professional teachers. When we think about teams, when we think about distributed expertise, we now allow for 9 credits of electives in our program, which is actually unheard of in teacher prep programs, so that not only can they specialize in an area of education that we normally special ed or second language or another kind of endorsement area, but we're also reaching now across the university and allowing them to specialize in things like digital media, Indigenous education, computer science, civics education, lots of things around health and wellness, counseling, so that we're providing greater, both greater breadth and depth as we're putting people out there and bringing more expertise to schools as they're being hired. Cost. No cost is always a good thing, which makes some of these other programs really attractive. If a district can do this at no cost, right? That might be a good thing. The way we work with PV and MESAs, because we have Arizona Teacher Academy, which makes us also no cost, right? And that this issue around ATA and really needing to increase ATA funds is going to be more important this year than it has been. I mean, last year we had 300 on a wait list, and we were very fortunate that the governor actually stepped up. ADE actually stepped up first, and then the governor stepped up to provide more money. But it's not like we have a capacity issue. We can take as many as we can get, but the money always is an issue. And so when we're giving people lower cost or no cost options, that's a good thing, but that gets balanced then with quality in these other areas. The other thing that we have found is that it's not just tuition cost. So we have an emergency fund for students. Through the pandemic and beyond, we give money for food, we give money for rent, we give money for, my car had to go in the shop, I don't have the money for the deductible. My car, I don't have a car to get to my placement or to get to my job in a school. Oh my God, I cannot even begin to tell you how much the living expense and the emergency expenses that come up for people when they're in these programs, and it would stop them in their tracks, right? If I can't pay the deductible because my car broke down or I was in an accident, whatever, I can't get to my placement, I can't do my residency, I'm done, right? And these are people often in their senior years, right? Junior, senior years. So that kind of thing around cost is also. The other thing is that I think every one of them today, so all of our teacher candidates, I would love for them to all be employed in an education setting, and that would also help. So it would be better for them to be working in schools than working at McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever, and they could be hired as teaching assistants or paras or whatever. So we're working with that to also allay cost. But the program has to allow for that to happen and has to allow for we'll talk about clinical experience, but they have to allow it to count. One of the things that we're looking at right now is how to actually shift what we would have called internship or residency student teaching back into the program across either 4 years or the semesters that they do this with our alternative program, so that they can be working, but that work, that clinical experience, that all counts. We need all that we need that experience to count. But then we need to build in the coaching and the feedback in all of our courses instead of at the end with people who are supervising, who may or may not have the content, again, in all of those areas. So that's all part of cost. Time to completion needs to be reasonable, but it also has to have the ability to go faster or slower, right? Depending on life circumstances. You want to make sure that you're retaining people, that people can go through a program at the pace which makes sense to them. And that the content and the assessment is reasonable, right? That can be accomplished alongside clinical practice. Evidence-based content. Content is important. The content has got to be based on leading research in the field. Not what people think is good, not what they've been doing. There has to be some quality check on the content in a program. There is a lot that we know about instruction and assessment and curriculum and all kinds of things. We've got to make sure that that is correct and it's right, and people aren't teaching things that just because that's, all the left brain, right brain stuff. Okay, that's all been debunked. All of the things we know about, just a lot of things, right, that are not research-based. All the stuff around literacy, right, around science of reading and all those kinds of things, that is all got to be baked in, right, to these things, because we know that there's research-based and there's other research-based around literacy, around math, around all kinds of things. The instruction is we talk about job embedded, right? Including transferable knowledge and skills. So it has to be knowledge and skills that actually work in classrooms. Content that supports P12 learners, and I would say puts P12 learners at the center of that learning, and that aligns with current policy and standards. Faculty. We want people who are teaching them that actually have strong content knowledge. In our case, in a university, Higher Learning Commission requires that faculty at universities have to have a degree higher than the level they're teaching or have exceptional expertise. So people who are teachers, the educator preparers count. And they ought to be people who actually know how to mentor and know how to think about the whole teacher candidate for interpersonal relationships, nuance of practice, what we think about as the art of teaching. And I think for personalization. So this is not about programs that put their stuff online and like never interact with students or never help them think about the nuance of teaching. And then, of course, really strong clinical job embedded practice early and often, meaningful and relevant experiences, high quality school-based mentors, and we would say serving on teams. If we could get all of our teacher candidates serving on teams, if I could get districts to move faster around team-based models, we would do that. But they certainly should not be a single teacher of record. I think we're doing a disservice to kids and we're doing a disservice to them. And then there's just a whole lot of stuff around improvement and innovation, and how is that program actually thinking ahead, and how are they future facing, and how do they think about continuous improvement and scalability and fidelity and all kinds of things around just how these programs improve over time. How do they think about innovation? That's it. So that was my brainstorm of how do we actually think about it? And is there a way to actually help then the board think about what's quality and what's not, and where are these different programs on this continuum, and how many stars would you give them on different things? And is it okay that this one gets 2 stars on this, but look, the cost is less? And so, these are all things I think the board has to wrestle with as you're approving programs. So I'm not here to say we're perfect. We're probably not perfect on some of these things. And I will talk about that too. But I think it is a way to start to think about if we were really, really, really going to, make sure that every single teacher in a classroom or every single team, right? This is why it should be teams, because they're not all going to come out of programs like this. And they're not all going to be perfect. And they're not all going to have every single strength on every one of the 173 core competencies. They're not. They're human.
And they're beginning teachers,
Which
is a license to be.
And so this
dangerous.
whole day one ready, they're going to be day one ready. Forget it. But it's not. It's not possible. So I don't know. So reaction.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Because I think this gets muddied in the water. And it was a slide that talked about content knowledge. And I think when I'm clarifying my understanding of that slide or the term content knowledge, you're not speaking necessarily of this person has a math content knowledge or social studies. You're talking that your professors, your faculty have content knowledge of how to teach,
Right,
the pedagogy. And so that's, when we talk about the SME certificate, that's all focused on somebody has subject knowledge.
right, right.
When
Subject matter expertise.
where there's a lot of research out there that talks about pedagogy is more important for a teacher to have necessarily than
Both, right,
right,
Right.
but if you don't know how to
But-
teach and address kiddos' needs.
right. Right. But these are faculty, right? These are our
Right.
faculty who also have both, right? Who have
Right.
high levels of content knowledge. Well, we talk about content knowledge, right? So if I'm teaching math, I should have high levels of math content knowledge. I should have understanding about how to teach math. And then I should also have understanding about generally how to work with kids, how to build relationships, all that sort of pedagogical knowledge, right? So we talk about content, pedagogical content and pedagogy.
And
That's what you're looking for in the people who are teaching. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I teach masters in the master's program in education for teachers. And one of the biggest things that I see that is very important, me as a instructor, is to share my experiences. Pedagogy is great, content knowledge is great, but you also have to have the experience. So you have to have
Yeah,
all these things put together, because when you are talking with your students, you can't just talk book knowledge or pedagogy. You got to talk experience.
Yeah,
So,
I would
so
agree,
that it
totally
becomes,
agree.
because then it becomes real to them. You're saying, this has happened to me, or I did do this, and this is how. You still have to put yourself into it. And that's what makes a really good faculty and a really good teacher of teachers. Those people who's had that experience and can make that light bulb go off in that teacher's head.
Yeah,
Or that student's head.
totally agree.
Just a general question that I have is, ASU has been doing this for a long time, and you guys have been innovative leaders and, practice-based learning, for a number of years. I think Scott Ridley played a role in this before he went to Texas Tech and unfortunately passed away. Sort of giving that clinical experience early in that feedback loop with both the school, but then also back with ASU's faculty. Where are the placements for ASU and based on this sort of the future of the education workforce, where are you hoping to have placements? And, if first year teachers often are in high poverty, under-resourced school
Right.
districts,
Right.
is that where the placements are taking place? And then finally,
Yeah,
I'll
it's a
stop.
complicated
I have like
question.
all these
Go ahead.
questions.
Yeah, it's okay. It's a complicated question today. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, when I got here, let me start there. We were placing students in probably 300 schools. And we decided 6 years ago that we would work with very specific districts, right? So I came from a teacher ed background that was about professional development schools, about trying to place more teacher candidates in a school. I mean, this is what Scott was doing
Yeah.
a long time ago. And Michelle Roja here, they started to try to do that here. It didn't happen here. But so we said, we're going to narrow this down and we're going to try to get them all into 15 school districts. We're going to have very strong partners. So then you fast forward to today, and what's happening is that with good intention, what we'd really like are strong partners that are moving to team-based models. So we place a lot in Mesa Public Schools because they moved to team-based models. It was a way for us to start training our teacher candidates in working in teams, right? Kyrene is another district, Creighton. So there are some districts that have come with us, and we are placing students in those schools, predominantly in high need schools, because I still think that that's important. But more and more what's happening is our teacher candidates are getting hired. And they're getting hired everywhere.
Mhm.
And I don't want to say to a teacher candidate, you can't work, because they need to work. So that means in some ways, and post-pandemic, we changed our program and said, we're face-to-face, but we're also going to stay remote. And at the graduate level, we're remote and online. So much of our face-to-face population has shifted and moved, but all of that was because they're getting jobs. And so the minute they get a job as a teaching assistant or a para or whatever, like, okay, more power to them, because they need to work. Our students need to work. We have, of our population, our college right now is over 8,000 students. Half of those are in teacher prep. And 48% are students of color. 90-some% are female. And so we're seeing these young women of color who are coming into this field, who need to work, I mean, this is why we've got emergency fund. This is why ATA has been so important. It's why we have wait lists of 300 students, because the money matters. We could get more teachers. We could, if we had more money in ATA tomorrow, we could, I'd have more, we'd have them all. We'd have them all. Like, we wouldn't need districts to certify. We'd have them all. But we have become more flexible, and we have changed modalities, and we are now reaching out to rural. And now we've got teacher candidates all over the country, because we've changed our modality and we're allowing them to work. And so then that shifts, right? The way that we think about clinical practice. And this changes the way that we think about the old student teaching models, and why I think right now on the graduate level, we're trying to really say, look, do we need internships and residencies? Why can't we build all of that into the courses like labs? Right. So think about, a chemistry lab or a biology, whatever that is. Can we build that in so that when they're taking math methods, it's the person who has the expertise in math methods who is then helping and supervising. And we can do that now because we have the technology to do it, because we use GoReact and everything's video. And the video is unbelievable. It's better than me sitting in a classroom, because now I can watch the video, I can annotate, I can put in notes, I give them feedback. It's a game changer in terms of clinical practice.
Can you elaborate a bit more about that? I mean, is it sort of like VR? Because I know some.
No.
No.
So you take your videotaping, somebody's videotaping you in front of the classroom. You upload that to me. That
And then
comes
you
through
can-
GoReact. I'm watching your video, but I can stop the video at any point in time and I can give you feedback. So if I stop that video at 2 minutes and 23 seconds, I can stop and say, hey, you know what, Catherine, like this,
Mhm.
did you notice, right? This student over here who was off task, or did you notice that, or this was a really good question you asked right here. Do you think you could have asked a higher level question here? Do you think all of those kinds of things get annotated in that video? And if we had the content people who were doing that, who were teaching the classes, we think it would be a stronger experience. They'd be getting more feedback from more people over a longer period of time. And all of that experience they're getting would count. There was a time when we did not count that. Right? They had a job. We didn't count. If they were a paraprofessional, it didn't count. They still had to quit their job to do their student teaching. So now we've got flexibility around some of this to do that. Thank you, Bruce.
What did you ask?
No.
Or did you just know?
It's just Bruce works with us all the
Yeah.
time. I'm just thanking him for all of the
There's
flexibility
also
that we've
less
had.
disruption in the classroom.
Yeah.
You don't
Right.
have- You don't have.
You don't have
who they
somebody
don't
coming
know
in,
sitting
you
there
know, like,
writing down.
Yeah.
right? And as good as those people are, they don't
Mm-hmm.
know it. They don't know everything. They don't have content knowledge and everything. So everything is shifting. The technology is helping us to shift, and then we're building new HR systems and with Mesa, and thinking about these new roles and then new levels of certification. And there's all kinds of things now that are coming out of this that we should be paying attention to, from an entry, from an advancement, from a how do things count, from what is quality ed prep, how do we place students. It is a brand new ballgame.
Interesting. What do you feel like ASU did well before, and how are you taking that and incorporating it into what you're doing going forward? sometimes
I
there's like
think-
new things, but you throw the baby out with the bathwater and it's like.
Oh, I don't, yeah, I
this is what
don't,
You guys have done really
N-
well. And as you look into the future for the next generation educator workforce. What do you feel like are some?
It would
of
be
the
interesting.
Going forward.
it would be an interesting exercise for us to go through this and say, 3 years ago, here's where we were on this 5-star scale. And then where are we today? We're closer to this because that's where I think this is obviously where I think we've moved. We've always had, I think, strong faculty. We've had really strong faculty doing this work. I think we've had strong partnerships. I think we have strong continuous improvement. I think we've had strong clinical experience, both in the junior, senior year. I mean, 60% of our students are transfer students, right? So that's where most of the clinical piece has gone. I think we have maintained, I think, really strong freshman, sophomore year experiences for students. I just think we've become much more flexible and we are the flexibility part and much more personalized for students. I think we are saying no less than we used to. And I think we were a good program. I mean, ASU has always been looked at across the country. And I say this as this is my 4th institution of higher ed. Has always been looked at as having a very strong teacher prep program, but it also has been in some ways still a traditional teacher prep program. And I think now we're shifting, but we also are trying to move the field. We're also trying to change schools because you got to a point in teacher prep where you couldn't really, like, how are you going to improve upon it unless schools change? Because you did all this preparation, they go into schools and the schools are still the same.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. They're not going to stay. You're not going to retain them. And so that's where we came to, like, we've got to work on this side to actually change it has to be a simultaneous renewal, but this has to change dramatically. And that one teacher, one classroom model is the thing that is keeping people from the whole thing moving, because the minute we've done this in these schools, schedules start to change. The content's becoming more personalized. We should take the board out to Stevenson Elementary and Westwood High School in Mesa, honestly.
But you've also been supporting leadership too, right? 'Cause we
Yeah.
know that's a big thing. So not only is
Yeah.
it
But that's
System
shifting
changes.
too.
the system changes, but
Yeah.
the leadership component
Yeah.
that supports this.
Yeah.
You're supporting that.
Yeah.
in your
That's
in your
changing too.
placements.
That's changing too.
Mhm. It's a cultural shift.
Mhm.
It really is.
The way we
It's
work together has changed. The way our faculty works together changes. The way our student services is actually supporting students has changed dramatically.
Mhm.
We stopped having, so my student services was all advisors. Check, 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 check.
Yep.
Today, we have advisors that are working in teams. And we have a student success team. So instead of all the advisors, we brought in somebody that does financial literacy, that triages for counseling and mental health, that supports academic, that works with these students who needs, extra support. And, there is a whole SOS system for students, right? When they need whatever they need. And we have said money cannot get in the way. We will find the money, whatever they need. We're going to find it, right? But we've got now a team of people who are really supporting them and thinking about career, and those who say, I don't think I want to do this. What else can I do? And we can finish them now. We've decoupled certification and degree. That has made a big difference for students. So there's a lot that goes into this, and that's why as you're looking at this is more than just educator preparation, is more than just take a bunch of courses and boom, you're certified.
Oh, right, for sure.
And then there's a whole induction piece. So ATA has also now allowed us to do a lot of work around induction and shifting. I mean, I could talk about professional learning and how that is shifting, because we're not going to professional learn our way out of this. That's going to have to look different. We've spent trillions and trillions of dollars on professional learning that has made absolutely no difference whatsoever. I have our book in the car. I should bring in copies of the book. Get you copies.
Well,
of
and
it.
especially when they don't retain. So you offer all this professional learning and then they're out the door in 2 years.
Exactly.
If you don't change
Yeah.
the system.
I'm
So-
preparing teacher care. Well, this was the thing. I mean, this is, and Brent Madden, who's my executive director for this next education workforce. I mean, we looked at each other and said, what are we doing? We're preparing all these teacher candidates, hundreds of them come to graduation.
Yeah.
Here's 1,500. They're graduating in 3 years.
Are they there? Are you
No,
guys-
they're not there. 2/3 will be gone. You have school districts that are losing a third of their teachers a year. This has been happening though for 20 years. This is not a pandemic phenomenon. And so I kid all the time and I say, 20 years ago, I went to a conference, people, oh my God, breaking news. We have a recruitment retention problem. And here we are sitting here going, breaking news. We have a teacher shortage. We have a recruitment retention problem. But it's a structural problem. It's a design problem. So I don't know if I'm helping you. And then there's a whole lot of things we do, right? That all the checks and balances. I mean, this is the other, part of this. And we don't need to go through it. I don't
No,
talk about it, but course evaluations and program assessments and end of program surveys and Title II reporting and US News, like all of these things are all of our checks and balances as we think about what's really who's holding us accountable. And how do we think about quality and how do we, think about, constantly changing this program?
As far as quality, you went through this 8-point checklist, which is pretty fantastic. But what does quality and excellence mean to Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College?
Say more.
When I'll put it in the context of maybe A through F, like what does an A mean? What does high quality teacher mean to you? Is it that in 3 years that the educators that you are sending out into the world are still there, that they're still there in 5 years? Is it that, they feel a level of comfort in the classroom, whether they're at the front or doing intentional
question.
reading instruction? Is it a sense of purpose and meaning? Like, what does quality mean for ASU?
I think that's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer. It used to be, I could walk into a classroom and I could tell you whether or not this was a great teacher. And the more that I have thought about this work that we're doing now around teams, I'm not sure that we are ever fair to any one teacher in judging them or evaluating them in terms of what they can do. There are some these people should not be teaching, right? I can also tell you that. But there's this continuum of quality based on their experience and their ability and their strengths and there are people who would just say, I am really, really good at teaching reading. I am not good at teaching math. We had a teacher candidate who was on a team. She said, I'm the best one on this team teaching math. She's like, I love it. I love teaching math. And they allowed her to lead math. It wasn't a departmentalization. Everybody still had to teach math. But she's the one that looked at the data. She's the one that thought about curriculum. She's the one that thought about groupings. But here's what you're going to teach. Here's what you're going to do with these kids. Here's what you're going to do with these kids. Here's what you're going to do with these kids. And I'm going to lead this. And I'm going to work with the kids who are struggling the most. But you might be really, really, really good at teaching reading. And this person isn't.
Right.
And so the question is, how do you judge today? Right? Like what's this whole issue around teacher evaluation? We're also we're working with NIET around team-based evaluation, because I think at the end of the day, that's the better indicator. Can we create the right kinds of teams around kids than expecting every individual teacher to be 5 stars on 173 competencies?
Yeah.
And so, I want somebody, right, who's empathetic. I want somebody who has good character. I want somebody who cares about these kids, is compassionate, who understands families. And we still need those people.
Right.
And then,
really, the results that we're seeing in course evaluation and program and the end of program survey reflect the same things that we're seeing out there. Students give us high marks when it comes to the quality of teacher prep and the feedback they're getting. They just want to be in front of the students more. They want more experience. They want more, to be a teacher. Well, so, but the other areas we look at course evaluation, every course and every instructor is evaluated every time they teach a course. And all of that is fed back into quality cycles, who is chosen for faculty placement, a number of other things. So we have a number of loops where we do, go to the student and say, tell us what can we be doing better and things like that. And And I think we're doing a very good job in many areas.
But that question, Kevin, around what is teacher evaluation, right? How do I
Yeah,
know, right? How do I know?
Mhm.
The district keeps them there. Right? It's hard.
I mean, on that same point of. There's some institutions that have the mindset of, I have a couple questions around faculty. So let me back up. So first is like, how many have had actual teaching experience, not in the academic setting, like I'm preparing for the
Almost
next
all.
educator,
They all
but
have to.
they've taught fifth grade, or they taught.
Our faculty,
Yeah,
all of them.
all of them. And then, are there opportunities for them to go back into the classroom to sort of go and see and sort of be like, okay, this idea of like, this is my theory. And I'm going to
Some-
teach you pedagogy. I'm going to teach you how to do these things. Now you go and practice during your clinical experience. And then sort of that idea of the theory into practice, and then actually going and seeing, oh, maybe my theory that I'm teaching, it might need to be adapted a little bit because what I was drawing from 20 years ago, or when I was in the classroom in the 1980s, it's a little bit different.
Some.
And so let me adjust so
Some.
that it's a little bit more relevant or I'm preparing my kids better.
Some.
Okay.
Some are closer to schools than others, no question about it. Some are doing their research in schools, right? A lot, I mean, tenure track faculty, a number of them, particularly in teacher prep, are doing research in schools. So they're pretty close to schools. Clinical faculty, some do, some don't. But this is also like, we can move clinical practice, right? And they begin to see what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And we can get rid of all these assignments and assessments that don't mean anything, and the reflections and the writing papers. And because now we've got chatbots that are going to write papers anyway. So
Right.
another
That's right.
conversation. What counts is, what are they doing?
Exactly.
Jackie, anything? I'm gonna leave you out. Go ahead.
Yes, one of my questions is how do you promote what you're doing across the state? And how do you particularly focus on the rural areas where you may get a one-room schoolhouse with maybe 50 students in it and 3 teachers, and how do you get that information out, or what is your plan on getting that information out?
We've been getting the information. We actually have a pretty big marketing effort that's, we've been trying to bring as many districts in, as we can. You and I have not spoken about this. We've talked to Tim Carter about this a lot. But there's been a lot that's going out to districts and trying to encourage districts to come to we've got a convening in February. We've had this learning cohort that we have wanted districts to send teams. There's a lot going out to the districts. I mean, we'd love some help getting this out. But it certainly has been out there, and then it's a design problem, right? So we understand that. And we do have some rural schools that have been thinking about this, not here in Arizona, but, really thinking about what does it look like when you've got, smaller groups, right, of professionals, but then how do you use technology? How do you think about our ASU Prep Digital is working with a number of rural districts to pour it in, different courses. I mean, rural districts who will never have enough math teachers or physics teachers, things like that. But, certainly now with people, really thinking about remote, there are ways to design this. And we've been encouraging people to come to this learning cohort that we've been having this fall. We'll have another one, I think, in the spring. It'll be more of a condensed, like 3-day version or 2-day version or whatever of what we did this fall. Really just encouraging people to come and learn about this and then think about how they can launch a school in the fall. And we had talked to Tim actually about intermediaries, right? And could the county soups be intermediaries for this to start wrapping their head around it and providing technical assistance? So while ASU will be a hub for this work, and if I can get your address, I'll send you the new book that talks about this more, but I can send some other things too. but we're going to need intermediaries. We're going to need trusted partners to be spokes for this work and to think about the kind of technical assistance that's going to be needed, the nuance that you're talking about for each of these schools. And I think that's the opportunity. So we're trying to form that group too. So at the same time, we've got these 70 school systems. We're also talking to people. I mean, these are like BOCES and region centers. And here it could be, this is what Tim's idea, it could be the county's superintendent's offices. It could be, we've got some universities that want to play this role in their community. So they're bringing, these intermediaries then are bringing teams to these learning cohorts and then wanting to learn with them so that they can then help launch and be that conduit. So we're building all of that system.
So I just to be really specific, I still didn't understand how are you promoting? I just sent an email to some of my smaller schools and asked them about this. Some of them don't know anything. So I was asking, how are you actually?
It's been mostly email. I mean, it's mostly email communication.
Okay. Yeah, so what I'm doing, I'm trying to fill in a gap.
Yeah.
And I just asked, have you heard of this? Do you know anything about this? Okay,
Yeah.
I just sent a mass email out while you're talking.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's why I was asking.
It's mostly been email. It's mostly been email communication right now.
All right. So
but we also have we've been bringing, there've been groups, people that have brought groups together that we've been meeting with. We've talked about this at, the school leaders conference, so we've been at different places across the state, across the country, presenting at different places, so, but we're happy if you want to bring a group together to, present this. We've had tribal communities come together around this. We've had, we've been a lot of different ways.
okay.
But we're happy to come anywhere, talk to any group.
No,
Anytime.
I was just curious, and
Yeah.
I do like the concept of teams. I've been in schools that they do use that concept, but overall in education, that will be definitely a culture change that
No question.
I think would be a breath of fresh air to schools, but how we're going to put it out there is you have to be very strategic, understand the demographics of the schools, and yes, find those teams or those people, I like to call them missionaries, that will understand, and then those trusted missionaries go to these places where you have amazing schools, but you haven't touched yet. So I think it's a great idea. And I always like my job is to ensure that schools get the information and make their decision. So we have to give the schools as much information as possible so that they can make good decisions, especially when it comes to training and logistics, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's follow up and I'll go through the whole thing with you. And we can bring a group together, or I can come out, whatever. We're happy to do anything. I really want more Arizona school districts doing this. We need them. And I think, and we've talked about this on the policy side too. So what is it that we need to incur? It's not even about money. It's about permission, right? It's about creating something, right? That gives permission for districts to be able to do this.
Absolutely. It's about being a learning community.
Yeah.
So that everybody will understand what's going on so that they can make their decisions, and everybody needs to know what's out there.
Yeah. And so we've talked about, innovation zones and all kinds of things around this, but that's where I think, we could use the board's help in thinking about what this is and how do we give districts permission. Alicia, I don't know if you have any thoughts about any of this.
Yeah. There's a couple of things going through my head. I think that we have the state, right? But then we also have the federal, right? So we have to take into consideration both of those aspects and know that this is where you come in. Know that some of the federal requirements for the certification of teachers within district schools, at least, we have to figure that out, right? because we were talking a couple years back about,
Much better.
we moved away from highly qualified, but we still have
Appropriately
appropriately certified.
But I
Yeah.
think there's enough flexibility in the system. We've talked about
Yeah.
teacher leader standards and making endorsements and doing some of the things that
Yeah,
we're not restricted from now, but
Mm-mm.
I think you're talking about some of the supervision and some structures and some expenses that LEAs might
Think so.
out of the
Oh, yeah.
norm, and how does rule and state statute
prohibit and how do you
prohibit
change
or
it?
discourage?
It's more that. It might be that. I mean, we've talked about that. But people say to me all the time, what's the policy you need? And I said, we need to look at the policy that is discouraging, right? That, it's getting in the
Do
way.
you guys
more
have
than
like a
anything.
list of all those things, like,
No, we've not found anything really. I mean, we haven't really, I mean, there's nothing at it's all, frankly, it's district level. It's all
Something
school
that-
board level. It's not, there's really nothing at the federal level or the state level that's keeping us from doing any of this.
really the district policy level?
I mean, I think at some point,
It looks different and feels different.
yeah, I think at some point, I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of roles are created, particularly at the para level. And then how we could help, right, support the different stacking of credentials or different kinds of credentials, right, for paraprofessionals, so that it allows them to move into the professional teaching realm easier, faster, but it also allows them to move up a pay scale. So that's, so we think about MESA, if they come and they take 2 reading courses from us, and now they've got some expertise in the science of reading. Now they're a paraprofessional that's also a literacy accelerator. Can we, does a district then pay them $1 more, $1.50, whatever it is, right, per hour? But it starts to help, right? Think about paraprofessionals, or they do special ed and they become, something like, we're making names up as we go.
Yeah.
But are there ways, right, that when you think about the healthcare and you think about all the technical positions, right, radiologists and the hematologists or the whatever, like all those people have different jobs. They all probably have different levels, right, grades, knowledge, whatever. We could be thinking about paraprofessionals in that way.
Yeah.
And we could also be thinking about professional teachers then as real lead teachers, people who are actually leading
Right.
teams,
Right.
or they're cross team leads. They are making more money, but so districts that are now teaming are paying stipends, right, for that. They're going to figure out how to sustain that. Many of them are doing that with ESSER money. But at least they've got some on ramp to do that. But I think there's something to this idea, right, of people getting specializations, that elementary teacher is not an elementary teacher is not an elementary teacher. And that we're actually preparing them for the context in which they think they're going to go to.
We've had the conversation, so we've got, and some of your staff was involved with teacher leader standards, which we're hoping to float here maybe in January or February. That could lead to an endorsement, so folks could add the specialization,
Yeah,
have a career track. And then one of the things that we were brainstorming too was there's no certification coming out of CTE. There's no certification for less
Right.
than a bachelor's that would allow a district to put them under contract and give them
Yeah.
benefits.
right.
And so it's creating an associate teacher certification that says you're not teacher of record. Let's, we'll
Yep.
dissuade all of that
Yeah,
and encourages a pairing with
Yeah.
a lead teacher in a team.
yeah,
But would allow them to have a fingerprint card, so we have safety.
yeah,
And to start getting time in the classroom, districts could differentiate their pay, they could give them benefits. Then they could be involved, kind of like what they almost did with classroom based, but they just didn't open it
Yeah.
up
yeah,
enough. And so we've got a draft of that. We've asked the Attorney General. I think we've kind of reached out to some legal, but it probably needs a little more vetting.
yeah,
But if we could float that and dissuade, the pushback was no bachelor's for a teaching credential. And the classroom based rolled out. Special ed was it?
Well, that was last year, now you had 18,
Yeah,
yeah.
and so
but you have to be.
that
within
would,
18.
that would allow you, for district schools.
Yeah.
To put some of the folks
Yeah.
you're talking about with
Yeah.
specializations on a
Yeah.
contract. Moving towards a bachelor's, moving
Yeah.
towards.
What's a
more
junior look
credential.
like, right? You can
Yeah.
hire a junior and make
Yeah.
them an assistant teacher, associate
Yeah.
teacher, right?
And
They've
it's-
had some,
Yeah.
right? They've had some preparation. Now we're putting them in anyway, right?
Yeah.
They have a day of internship, but they could be doing more, right? If this was their job.
Truly like.
So they could be,
apprenticeship.
Yeah.
yeah,
An
yeah.
apprenticeship.
We've been looking at apprenticeships. and all
CTE ed professions could move into this because one of the
Yeah.
things CTE likes is a credential. There's really no
Yeah.
credential.
Yeah.
They call it a para, but we don't have a credential in Arizona. So we could give a credential, then they could get involved in,
Yeah. And you know Lennon
uh,
Audrain?
no,
Lennon Audrain is a doctoral student of mine. Lennon is a phenom. Lennon is he's working part-time with us on Next Education Workforce on the TSL grant. He's also working part-time for Mesa, leading a CTE ed prep program. But what he's doing is he is setting the stage. He's building new curriculum for that. And those high school kids are now working on teams. So where Mesa has teams, those kids are now coming in and he's preparing them to be leading reading groups and things like that, because he's built the CTE curriculum around science of reading and all kinds of things. So that opportunity then for the district then also to hire their high school kids, right? That the CTE that also double dips, right? So now high school kids who also need to work, that if districts could hire these kids because now they've been prepared to come in and work in their elementary school. So that's what he's building, that whole thing that I think we're going to be able to replicate, and it'll be amazing. Should talk to him sometime.
That's great. You just mentioned science of reading, and there's been a lot more attention around that topic in particular. But also there have been higher ed institutions that have had different opinions on how do you teach reading and literacy. And you mentioned in your 8 points for quality, sort of the 8 criteria for the Buyer's Guide of Teacher Prep, sort of as evidence-based content. If you're a higher ed institution and you believe that the research that your institution has done is sort of like the end all, be all, but yet other institutions have demonstrated that the research you have been done is not necessarily accurate and not necessarily evidence-based. Like, what are the policies and procedures that, whether it's the state board of
The only
education
topic
or
that comes up
other,
around this, that this is the only thing. The reading wars have been going on for a
Ever.
zillion years.
but I mean, just like, even if it was math or there's something specific around science or whatnot, like, how does a higher ed institution, look at their faculty and be like, gosh, we need to maybe move in a different direction?
It's a hard question. I don't know if I have an answer. I am very fortunate. And I have been in institutions that weren't as bad. I have a very balanced faculty around this. That have been on board with science of reading. We have had all of our reading faculty go through letters training now. But at the end of the day, there's a really good piece that came out in the Hechinger report. I could send you about this. Because they did a really good job of trying to parcel this out and kind of give the pros and cons around all of these things. And at the end of this piece, what it comes down to is, how do you personalize for kids? There's some kids who need phonics, there's some kids who don't. There's some kids who need this, there's some kids who don't. Just because a kid, right, is at a level H and they're reading and their level of reading books doesn't mean that what they need is something, they may need something different, right? So that level doesn't even tell you anything, because it could be that one kid needs help around comprehension at that level and another kid needs something totally different. I'm not a reading specialist. So that's why this work that we say we've got to move and we've got to err on the side of personalization. Now, I know there are other institutions in this state who would not agree with me, right? And and there are faculty who are very much, right, not in alignment on science of reading. But again, I think from the state board's perspective, right, we've now have regulation around, you got to teach science of reading, right?
Yeah.
That decision has been made. So faculty are going to have to do that. And they've got to do both. And that's a decision that's been made.
But as a dean of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, like, how does one go about be like, hey, this is the policy, this is the law of the land, like
You do. I mean, you what they have to do or
Yeah.
don't work for me. I mean, I mean, there's only so much I can push back, right? I mean, you know, or, you know, don't teach it or teach this piece of it or whatever it is. I mean, you know, you always have that with faculty, particularly tenure track faculty, right?
Yeah,
You think
yeah.
we know more than, you know, the rest of us. But this is it's the only place where this happens is reading.
Is reading.
It's not math, it's not science. It's not, I mean, the math community is pretty in alignment. The science ed community, they're in alignment, social studies, I don't know. It's the only place this has happened is reading.
Mhm.
On the topic of reading, well, and math too. So this is like years ago, when the district I was working for and I was the assistant principal, so I was charged with the schedule, which
It's
is
harder to get
great.
teachers to do it, by the way.
When we-
Sure.
When we were incorporating at the MTSS, we were doing a walk to read program for our K3s. And because of the historical nature of those grade levels being with their students, that teachers with their students all day long, it was an uphill battle for the grade levels to understand that if Ms. Williams' students went to Mr. Duplante's class for reading, like he was going to do a good job. Like there was that trust, right? While you're developing this, I know one of your examples was third grade. How did you get the buy-in from those educators who are so used to being just?
So you got to go with the willing to change. I mean, this is systems change
Yeah.
101. You just got to go with the willing. What we say to school districts is find one really, really good leader who really gets it. And they have to find one really good team of teachers. And then what's happened is that one really good team of teachers starts to do this. And then other teachers look in and go, oh my gosh, we want to do this too. It's not overall, you know, it's not all of them. And there have been principals who've said, if this is not for you,
Yeah.
go somewhere else. And the district has accommodated that, right? The district has also said, we know this may not be for everyone in every school. But when Andy Forlis put a flag in the sand and said, we're going to have half of our schools in team-based models within 2 years. That's what happened. And that was how we started. And that's how we say to schools, that's where you start. You're not going to go in and change an entire school in one fell swoop. It's not going to happen. But Stevenson Elementary School started 1 year before the pandemic with one team. By the second year, they had the whole school was in teams because people looked in and they saw that. And it actually, they would say it got them through the pandemic better than anybody else because they were working in teams.
Mhm.
And by the third year, then they had cross team people, they had special ed people in teams, they had then they started to really think about all these other people and how they came in on teams. And now they're thinking about now they've moved to mixed grade, mixed stage. Because they realized with the disparities,
Yeah.
now they had to really think about mixed stage.
Interesting.
And so it's not always horizontal, sometimes vertical, sometimes it's all kinds of things because but you know what, if he's the best on our team at teaching reading, every kid should have him.
Right.
If he's a former engineer that has skills around technology and math and whatever, you know, and experience, I mean, to your point, Jackie, like if Bruce is the one that's got experience, every kid should have, you know, should have access. If we've got a person of color, right, that not just those kids should have access to that person of color and their experience. Every kid should have access.
I had a follow-up and it left my head.
I can't build a relationship with every kid. Neither can any of you.
Mhm.
Can't do it. But what happens then too is the technology changes, the schedules start to shift, they're building big blocks, they're personalizing for kids. There's no more the high school. You look at Westwood High School right now, it is not 50 minutes of math, 7 minutes in the hallway, 50 minutes, 7 minutes, 50 minutes. It is not that anymore. Big blocks, 4-hour blocks where they are totally personalizing for kids. Kids are getting content, but they're looking, oh, this group of kids needs more time with math. This group of kids needs time with, reading. This group of kids needs blah, blah, blah. And then they built in big group blocks of time to do inquiry work so that all the teachers are working together on projects, and they built in planning time for themselves.
When, so maybe Mesa, for example. I don't know if you're a fan of, I think it was Rick DeFore, talks about initiatives right? So earlier we were talking about what are the district hurdles, what are the state hurdles, right? How many initiatives when you're in these programs that you're seeing work, like Mesa, like it's working, do they have like just that initiative? Do they have like a couple more? Because I'm
We
assuming
have a
that-
lot of like whatever an initiative is.
Well, you could have,
But this is a fundamental structural shift. I mean, I don't even think about it as an initiative.
but what's layered? Do you see extra things layered into that structure?
Probably, but I don't know what they are. I don't know at that level, right? Yeah, did they change curriculum? Is there something else they're bringing in?
Yeah.
Are they thinking about, I mean, there is, there's work they're
Could be
doing
a
around
lot of
personalized learning. That I know they're working with Center for Future of Arizona. I know that they're, I don't know what all those things are. Clearly, there are lots of other things that are going on in every district.
Right.
But this is not an initiative. This is a fundamental structural shift in those schools.
I only ask that question because when you're making those really big system changes, when you start adding other initiatives on top of it, you can't be good at anything. And I found that in my previous experience, it's like every 2 years you're changing something and
No question about
can't
it.
get good
No,
at it.
yeah, no question about it. I think, however, that what's happening in these schools and with these teachers that are working in teams, they actually find they're better with new curriculum coming in or with new, like other new things, right, that are happening because they're working at it together,
Mhm.
right? It's not every one of us individually having to figure it out. And so it shifts it just shifts the way that we're all now working on it and how those things happen. And it would be an interesting question to ask them. I can't answer the question about how they deal with that and what that looks like, but I know what you're saying. I get it because it happens. I mean,
Mhm.
it's like, if we just, we're not new curriculum our way out of this. We're not professionally developing our way out of this. We're not like all
Right.
those initiatives, all those things. We're not
Right.
PLCing our way out of this. We're not like,
Right.
it's going to take a fundamental system shift.
Did you already talk about this with professional development? Are they also aligning their professional development to the position that educator holds? So like your master teachers or lead teachers are going to one and your
Yes.
para,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because we're building that system.
okay,
And so we're working with them to build that out. So we're creating these new pathways for paraprofessionals, the CTE ed professions. We're building professional learning for lead teachers. We're building professional learning for teachers working on teams. All of that is getting built as we speak. It's new, it's nascent.
Yeah.
And we are building, all it takes is money, but yeah. If I can
Right.
find the one big donor, it would be great. I need about 20 million, just in case you had to know somebody.
And Mesa
Anyway.
shifting its HR system to be able to accommodate it, so that
Well, that's the
really is
TSL
something.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a federal money that
Mhm.
came along around human capital systems. And so that's all shifting. So Justin Wing is totally shifting what he's doing. And he's building teams, right?
Right,
And
right.
then teacher evaluation to team-based evaluation, both really. So there's lots of things then that are shifting in that space too. Their salary schedules. Have you been going to those? things?
No, I haven't, but
Okay.
I've,
You
talked
talked
a
to
little bit with Justin.
Yeah. I know there's a lot. This is a lot more than probably we start. A lot to digest.
It is.
And I don't know that it helps you answer your question about how do we
Yeah.
know who to stamp or who not to stamp, but
I mean, I think that's the larger question, both that's set by statute and policy and regulations. And in the meantime, I'll just keep grilling Bruce.
but it isn't a capacity issue, right? Like, so the answer, the real question is, why are we opening up? Like, why are we opening up the door and why are we breaking down sort of the fidelity of what we want and having more people do this? And again, like that's a different question because it's not a capacity issue on our part, right? ASU never says no, right, to a student walking in the door. It is a financial problem. If we had more ETA dollars, we'd be preparing more teachers. And we could work with these districts and the districts could then select and and again, having the flexibility that they could continue to work and get their certification, that's a game changer in and of itself. And so I don't know what the thinking is behind that. It seems, it is, it's redundant, like to think that all these districts are going to create their own certification programs and they're all going to be good and they're all going to, like, it doesn't even make sense to me financially or resource wise.
And everything in between, right?
We've talked about,
Institute of Higher Ed, all the way through private organizations with
Right.
alt,
right, well,
all the way through. No cost.
and I'll tell you, the conversation we had yesterday is, do we license our content? Do we give districts our content? And the answer is yes. Like, we could find a way to do that, because then at least we, if they come and they say, hey, we're gonna use ASU content, we're not gonna, come up with our own stuff. And then, we would also be getting feedback on that content, which would be great for us. We already have it. It's already online. It's already, like, it's totally, here, use it. That would help.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm willing to give it to them. To at least make that part feel consistent and have some fidelity and something in terms of the way that we prepare teachers. Otherwise, it's all over the map.
It's right in line with sharing our things for.
It's community educators.
Community
We're gonna liberate our
education.
content.
Exactly.
I don't care. I don't care. Here, have it. You want to prepare them, you want your people to prepare them, you want to prepare it in your context, in your district and whatever.
Yeah.
We'll give you the content, and then if they want degrees, they can come back and we'll reverse transcript the content because it was our content.
Yeah, and that's the issue right now with classroom-based and alternative. The board is statutorily prohibited from putting additional things
Yeah,
in those programs
exactly.
outside of what's listed. So the board, I mean, we've talked about this, the board can look at changing those statutes to potentially have more oversight of those programs. However, that may be a very uphill battle, based upon why the board was prohibited in the first place.
Yeah.
I would recommend that if the board wants to study changing those statutes for classroom-based and alternative-based, then the board needs to do some research behind it to create a good story of why the board, whether it's utilizing the story of saying, hey, we can keep classroom-based, however, we want them to be partnering with ASU, U of A, NAU, whatever. So we can ensure that what is being provided is good. And I'm sure you will still find school districts who want to do their own thing because they've been successful in their own thing. for
Dale's been doing it for a
decades.
long time.
That was gonna be my example, but it was.
You also.
I don't know what they're
You
called.
also asked a question earlier, so it's nothing in. I'm not even sure it's in the trad approval path. Gets at continuous improvement. There's some biennial reports that ask some questions, but I don't even know what those are offhand right now.
That's interesting.
And so your question earlier was, what is your definition of a successful candidate? Right? And how are you measuring, right? I mean, I just think from the school district perspective of continuous improvement, what do your grads look like? What are they able to know and do, or what are they able to, what's an outcome you're shooting for and how are you measuring that? And I don't know, we asked that. I think, my team is directed to review this, to look at the standards, the teaching standards,
Yeah.
leadership standards, and relevant national standards. And in the trad all the way through alternative, what they submit against those standards. That's the report that we give to the board is
Yeah.
the external evaluators have looked at the artifacts provided and the narrative provided. And have they covered the standards?
Well, and the only feedback, the only feedback you have, because you can't, the student achievement is so hard,
Correct.
is you'd have to get the evaluations of teachers.
Right.
And then you're trusting that whoever's evaluating them thinks about it the same way you think about it or whatever.
But right,
At
now, you
least
guys don't even know your stay rate. I mean, you guys are probably a little bit more ahead of the game because of.
a little bit.
But we're trying to put the DSAs, the data sharing agreements in place. So that you have hope, but
But I don't
If
even
they-
know that that's but I don't even know
Yeah.
that it's something that I've done that keeps them there or not. I don't think it does.
It's an indicator, but how heavy of an indicator is it?
I don't know.
Yeah, because there's lots of variables around that year.
There's lots going on around
Yeah.
that stay rate.
Yeah.
A lot. Depends on where they are, depends on who their leader is, but like it's all the retention issues that we know anyway, but.
Yeah.
Some of it's preparation, some of it, I don't know.
Culture and climate of where they're at.
Yeah, right. So I don't know.
Leadership of
I
where
don't
they're
know.
at.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't know. That's what's tricky, right? And
Yeah.
then we have trouble following them. We get some data from that, but not.
Yeah.
It's hard to follow them.
So the alt approval path, you may be able to add some questions. I think that law says it has to be substantially different than the traditional approval process. That's basically what it says. The classroom-based,
But you really do need to ask the districts how they're doing. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really about.
classroom-based, the app was, their program of study was for informational purposes only. Now that law changed. So we'll be coming back, or the question I have is, now that the site-based leadership was adopted with the same language. And the rule was closed, I believe, and how that was adopted is, now my team needs to know on the classroom-based plan of study that they now have to submit. What are we evaluating against? I would assume standards. But we
Well,
haven't had that
TAP, is it, like, does TAP mean anything at the end of the day? Like, I don't know.
Are we just looking at how is their program of study? Does it seem to address the teaching standards?
Mhm.
The site-based leadership program now, does the program study seem to address the adopted PSEL standards, the leadership standards? Haven't asked you guys that yet.
Where's accreditation?
That sounds like a 2023 problem.
Absolutely.
I won't be here.
I wrote it down.
Well, where's accreditation? State accreditation and all that, like,
Right, and staff and who does that and,
I mean, what they're giving you and what we give you are really very different things for approval.
Some states, I think we're still on primarily CAPE or EQUIP. Because they do site visits, but it costs the program.
It does.
It's very, but so we accept CAPE, you guys just approved the agreement on that. We may do EQUIP as well, push that forward. But we do have a state approval process that is controlled or designated by the board.
Mhm.
And
But we don't.
so far,
But we don't all do it. We don't do national.
the state
State.
one,
Yeah.
even our
Yeah.
CAPE program in
Yeah.
Arizona.
Yeah.
Does state approval first and uses that as evidence for their CAPE.
Jackie, you were about to say something?
No,
You just made something when Alicia said something.
It's Adam. She told me she doesn't accept my.
no, I'm taking notes. I'm doing a lot of listening and thinking right now.
I'm happy to follow up. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
happy. to follow up.
accreditation, again, it is very important. I'm on the accreditation team and we do accreditation for high schools, and that is a wonderful, good point. My concern is just alignment, not just ASU, but with all the schools that are providing
Yeah.
programs like this. I'd like to look across the landscape at what everybody's doing and look at those like things and this is big, and then going to schools. What are you doing? What do you need? Doing assessments with the schools and figuring that out. So I don't think it's just let the board decide, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be bigger than that because we don't want to dictate anything to anyone. We want buy-in. And I would like to know what everyone else is doing and what these schools are wanting. What are their needs? Do they agree with this? This is just, to me, it's wonderful. It's a big, wonderful can of worms that's going to be opened.
Mhm.
But I believe that this is going to move all of us westward if we do it right. So I'm taking notes. Yes, I would. As
Agreed.
far as the accreditation team, the things that we look at when we do accreditations, that should be considered too. There's so many things, but they're wonderful things. So again, I'm just taking a lot of notes and going to be asking a lot of questions and doing a lot of other things. So I do appreciate what you're doing right now.
Thanks.
So we have approximately 4 minutes left there anything we can do to like wrap up or?
I think this is incredibly helpful. I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you.
I would anticipate that the board or board staff will like continue to reach out as we kind of work through this EPP conversation.
Yeah.
The board will hopefully be doing some strategic planning in January, probably February, March. I would anticipate it's going to be a longer conversation.
Yeah.
And there, from my transition plan that was on the board's agenda for December, there are other areas outside of EPP that the board would like to discuss, and they are very substantial education topics. So,
And all related.
yeah, they are all,
They're
they're
all
all, having
related.
conversations that we had, I'm like, they're all related. So thank you again for always being a partner with
Yeah.
the state board,
Yeah.
and we'll follow up if we have
Any
anything.
questions?
Yeah. Okay, great. And then we'll send this out to the board members so they can also receive your wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Clay, for coming.